Hey there, it's Mike Robbins here, coming to you live for the first time in a few weeks now. I want to talk today about making mistakes. So, how do you feel about making mistakes? I'm not a huge fan, I'll be honest. Most of us aren't, but I think it's actually really important for us to talk about. I had a couple of experiences earlier this week that reminded me of some of my challenge with making mistakes, but the importance of being able to embrace mistakes, if you will, when they happen and understanding how important that is. So I talked about this. If you listen to my podcast, you know a bit of these stories, but hey, Adriana, nice to see you. So on Monday, I did a podcast interview with my friend Carly Hauk. She has a new book out this week called Shine. It's a conscious leadership book, and it's really great. And I do my podcast about once a week. I took last week off because we were away in Tahoe, but I haven't done a lot of interviews recently. I've been doing a lot of solo episodes. So this was only my second interview of the year and probably only my second or third one in the last 4 or 5 months. And I since had gotten a new computer or whatever. There's some details, but Carly and I get on, we catch up a little bit, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to hit record. And we have this like nice 50, 60-minute long conversation. And at the end of it, we get off, and then I'm looking at the audio. And then when I do an interview, I have to record a little intro and an outro. Hey, Susan, nice to see you. Hope you're doing well. If you're joining live, it's, what is it, like 11:45 a.m. Pacific time here on Thursday, the 25th. Feel free to just chime in and say hello. Let me know how you're doing and where you're chiming in from, where you're watching. If you're watching the video of this after, you can do the same. I usually look at the comments afterwards. But anyway, so what I realized was I had screwed something up and hit the wrong setting on the recording device or my software that I use, and only my half of the conversation was recorded, not Carly's. So it was unusable. And I was like, oh man, I'd done this a few times or had a few interviews that got screwed up in the early years with my podcast, but I've had the show for about 4.5 years, haven't done it. Gosh, it's been at least 3 years. Hey, Louise, I hope things are well in Toronto. Anyway, I was like, oh no, now what do I do? Do I just say, forget it and blow it off? Do I reach out to Carly and say, hey, listen, I'm so sorry. Hey, Hamish, nice to see you. I hope things are good in New Zealand. But I was embarrassed and frustrated. It seemed like a totally unforced error, as I like to call it, like not necessary by any stretch of the imagination. So I was trying to figure out what to do. Then I go into the other room because Monday was the 22nd. Rosie, our 12-year-old, it was her half birthday. We celebrate half birthday still in our house. And we had a little gift for her that she'd been wanting, which was this apparatus, this little machine. Hey, Jane. Nice to see you. Hope you're doing well. That makes basically like fruit smoothies. You put in sort of frozen fruit and it turns it into smoothies, or kind of like soft serve, but fruit. Anyway, we were struggling to put it together and figure it out. And we got it together, but then we tried it with some bananas and it came out really weird. And then we were realizing, oh, you need to freeze the fruit and then thaw it. So anyway, Rosie was getting annoyed with me as she kept saying, stop mansplaining to me, Dad. And I don't think I was mansplaining, but maybe I was. She likes to call me out on that. At any rate, in the process, okay, honey, let's freeze the fruit. We'll do this later. We'll do it for dessert after dinner. Okay. And she's a little irritated. And then as she went to go wash the bowl that we used, she dropped it and it broke. And not a big deal. It's a little funky bowl. But my face probably had a reaction. I didn't say anything. I didn't yell at her like, what are you doing? No, I just was like, and she looked at me and she was already kind of irritated with me anyway. And then she's like, stop looking at me like that. And she started crying and she ran out of the room. Yo, nanas, that's exactly what it is, Serena. You got it. But it sort of stopped me in my tracks. And I kind of went after Rosie, what's wrong, honey? And she was like, why'd you get so mad at me when I broke the bowl? And my reaction was, hey, Kareem, I didn't get mad at you, honey. And I didn't demonstratively get angry with her. But my knee-jerk reaction when the bowl slipped out of her hand and it broke, it was all over my face. And so these two things back to back And, I'm worked things out with Rosie and she was fine, but it had me stop and pause. How do I feel about when I make a mistake? Like forgetting to hit the right setting on a recording on a podcast that wastes an hour of my time and someone else's time. And then I have to, Carly and I ended up reconnecting yesterday and recorded that interview, and we posted the podcast today. But I did a podcast episode on this earlier this week to talk about it, because what I realize is my relationship with mistakes, although I've worked on this a lot over the years and it has gotten a little bit better, is still challenging, both when I make mistakes and when other people make mistakes. So let's talk a little bit about this. How do you feel about making mistakes yourself personally? And how do you feel when other people around you make mistakes? I mean, look, I've made a ton of mistakes in my life. Growing up, as a kid, in school, in sports, definitely. I played a sport, baseball, where there's just a lot of errors, a lot of mistakes, a lot of failure. And I was pretty good at it, but there were a lot of mistakes that I made. In my business, since I started this business 20 years ago, I've made tons of mistakes as a husband, as a father, as a son, brother, friend, lots and lots of mistakes. However, I hate making mistakes. It really is not my favorite thing. I don't know if it's anybody's favorite thing, but it's like, but I noticed, so for me, and I'm curious how this is for you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments if you're watching this live, or if you're watching it after the fact, you can comment as well. But for me, one of the things that I tend to do, I don't make a ton of big mistakes. I don't feel like I'm constantly making errors in my work, in my life. Right, Susan? Yeah, I have a tendency to do a couple things. First of all, I can be pretty anal and particular so as to make sure that I don't mess things up. And that, on the one side, there can be a positive side to that, right? Attention to detail and being thorough. But the negative side is it creates a lot of stress, a lot of worry. It's like I'm gripping tight. And also, there's definitely times I don't try things or I don't do things because I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to screw it up. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick to what I know because of the discomfort with mistakes. And then when I do make a mistake, to Susan's point, I often have a tendency to be really hard on myself. Right? Louise, that's a great perspective, which is it's a chance to course correct and grow, do it twice or thrice, and the conversation changes. That's absolutely true. And again, most of us can see that in hindsight. The challenge is when we're facing something where we might make a mistake or we do make a mistake. Right, John, if you aren't making mistakes at least once in a while, you aren't growing. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And then I'm just reading some of the comments, which is great. Serena's talking about, I know that I learn from my mistakes and I try to be mindful and grateful for that, but I still tend to beat myself up about it. Yeah, so there's a tendency to do that. I can relate to that for sure. Mistakes are growth opportunities. They definitely are, Jane. And then easier said than done, at least for me. I can see that in others. I can coach other people. But then here's the question. So we know how we are about mistakes with ourselves. We could all probably do a better job of having more compassion for ourselves when we make mistakes, being more willing to make mistakes, not that we want to, and then being more kind to ourselves when inevitably we do make them. The goal in life is not to never make a mistake. It's to be playing big enough in life, so to speak, that, mistakes do happen. Hey, Ray, good to see you. How about when other people make mistakes? How do you feel about that? Now, for me, what's interesting is, on the one hand, it depends on who it is. It depends on what it is. Let's be honest. Some mistakes are bigger than others, right? When we make mistakes that are like, oops, I messed this up. That cost me a little bit of time, a little bit of energy, maybe a little bit of money, or this is a little annoying, versus I made a mistake and it hurt another human being. The more influence and authority we have, so to speak, like in our jobs, in our work, they may have more significant impact on people. And sometimes the stakes are really high. Right. I'm listening to Barack Obama's new book, A Promised Land, and just thinking about what must it be like to be the president of the United States, any president, knowing that you make decisions, and if you make an error in judgment or a mistake gets made, like, people's lives are at stake, people's livelihoods are at stake. So most of us aren't dealing with mistakes that have that kind of impact, but there are different levels to it for sure. So yeah, Jane, we need to be kinder to ourselves, but how are we with other people? I know that although I think I've gotten a little bit better at it over the years, my knee-jerk reaction, like Rosie saw on my face, even though I didn't yell at her, I didn't scream at her, I didn't shame her, I didn't make a big deal, it was just a little bowl. My initial reaction when someone else makes a mistake is often subtle, if not so subtle, criticism. Now, again, I don't always say it. I've learned to bite my tongue. I've learned to mute myself, but that's my knee-jerk reaction, unfortunately. And I think if I'm really honest, it's less about them and it's more about some of my own angst and stress that I create for myself. Like, I don't ever make mistakes, or I try not to ever make mistakes. And if they do, and I'm continuing to work on that. Right, Brenda? Everything is fixable. That's true. There's not too many things that, right, when we make the mistake, we can't somehow fix it or repair it. For the most part, that is absolutely true. What's interesting for me, another aspect that I've noticed, when a really big mistake gets made, the bigger the mistake, the more compassion I seem to have for other people. I don't know why. It's weird, and I wish it were the other way around. Or not necessarily. I wish I had a ton of compassion no matter what when someone else made a mistake. The smaller the mistake, the more irritated I seem to get, which I'm not sure what that's about. But in general, look, we don't really see other people as they are. We see them as we are. So the more critical we are of ourselves, the more critical we are of other people. Corinne, absolutely. The reaction can depend on if there's accountability or transparency. I agree with you on that. If someone screws something up and admits it, you know what, I screwed this up. I mean, think of our kids, right? The kid breaks the bowl when you're not around and then tries to hide it or put it down in the garbage can, and you find it. You're like, who broke this bowl? And nobody, and my sister did it. My brother did it. You know, that becomes a secondary issue now. There's not transparency. There's not accountability. Owning up to mistakes for us, for ourselves, is really important. You know, I think of something that Eleanor, my counselor, said to me years ago about sort of the change cycle. She said to me, Mike, there's 4 steps in the change cycle: recognize, acknowledge, forgive, and change. So you recognize something that you've done, like a mistake or something you want to change. Hey, Deirdre, good to see you. Acknowledge the impact on ourselves, on other people, then forgive ourselves, or it could be forgive another person if they've made the mistake. And then the change happens naturally. So recognize, acknowledge, forgive, and change. And then Eleanor said to me, Mike, what you do, and you're not alone in this, is recognize, acknowledge, punish, and repeat. So often the punishing and not the forgiving is what has us repeat the cycle, do it again, not learn from the mistake. Right? There's that saying, I either win or I learn, as opposed to I either win or I lose. So a lot of different ways to look at this, but a couple things that I'll offer to you and to myself as we embracing and understanding that mistakes and failure even are a part of success, not the opposite of it. To John's point earlier, if we're not making a mistake from time to time, we're probably not growing. We're probably not playing big enough. Back when I used to coach people one-on-one more, when they would make commitments to me, and every single week or every other week, whenever we would have a coaching session, they did everything they said. I would say, look, if you're not failing at some of these things, they're probably not big enough. You're getting everything done. You're crossing everything off your list. You're accomplishing all your goals. That's fantastic. I'm not diminishing it, but maybe we need to stretch a little bit more, be a little bit bigger. So the first thing we can do is just realize and remember mistakes are part of life. They're part of relationships, parenting, leadership, business, you name it. We're going to make mistakes. So to embrace that. The second thing is, can we be kind and compassionate with ourselves when inevitably mistakes happen? Look at them with a growth mindset as a learning opportunity. And then with other people, can we similarly be forgiving and compassionate with them? And then set up, some level of expectation. To Corinne's point, if we expect accountability and transparency, hey, look, we're going to create an environment around here, whether it's within our family or within our team or whatever, where it's okay to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes, but we're going to own it. We're going to acknowledge it. We're going to forgive ourselves and each other for it. And maybe if there's something to learn from it, we're going to learn from it. We're going to do better the next time as best we can. I had sports coaches that would often say, make aggressive mistakes. I'm never going to get upset with you if it's a physical mistake that you make, but a mental mistake and not doing what we're supposed to be doing or forgetting something or not hustling, those are all things that sort of we can control. So be kind to yourself and others as mistakes happen. The more we expand our capacity for being okay with mistakes, 2 things happen. Number 1, less mistakes will actually happen. And number 2, we can actually grow and accomplish so much more when we're not afraid of it. So thanks for watching, whether it's on Facebook or on LinkedIn or on YouTube. If you watch the video of this after, feel free to leave a comment. Those of you that join live, it's nice to see you and see your comments. I may post some responses to some of the comments as well, along with a few links. Make sure if you're not already connected with me on our website, mike-robbins.com, and our email list and our podcast, you can definitely do that and check me out on whatever social platform you may not be watching this one on. All right. I'll talk to you again soon. I'm going to try to come on about once a week. Take care.